Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Fired Up and Plugged In podcast powered by Emergency Reporting. This is the podcast for all 21st century fire and EMS personnel. I'm Tom Lewis, Enterprise Training Manager and the podcast producer. Thank you for joining us for this part one of our Across the Pond special edition. Our guest today is British Fire Chief Tony McGuirk. Chief McGuirk is recognized as a visionary, strategic, and operational leader among international fire and safety agencies, both at the local, regional, national, and international levels. He is credited with developing and implementing one of the first and most progressive successful initiatives in the fire and emergency services, now known as community risk reduction. This concept is now embraced throughout North America, Europe, and Australia. In recognition of the leadership role he played in changing the culture of the fire service and community risk reduction, he was awarded the Queen's Fire Service Medal and was made Commander of the British Empire. After his retirement as Chief Fire Officer and Chief Executive of Department of Merseyside, UK, his consultancy has advised major corporations on risk, crisis and emergency management, leadership, innovation, and organizational change. He has also spent 5 years in Australia on a Distinguished Talent Visa as Executive Director with the Environment Protection Agency. Chief McGuirk has an international reputation for building and motivating cross-functional teams that exceed expectations. We are pleased he's able to join Chief Bruegman for what promises to be an engaging podcast. Chief Bruegman, it's all yours, sir.
Thank you, Tom. Tony, how are you?
I'm great, Randy. How are you? Thanks for the chance of speaking with you guys.
Oh, thank you, and good day, everyone, and welcome back to another session of Fired Up and Plugged In. And it's really a pleasure of mine to have Chief McGuirk on today because I've known Tony for many, many years. We go back almost from the inception of the accreditation process, where we actually were exploring what Great Britain had done, starting with the Riverdale report in 1936 about integrated risk management, which had significant influence on the development of our agency accreditation process, as well as community risk reduction here in the U.S. So, Tony, welcome. I know you've been a real advocate for risk management and looking at things a little bit differently, I think, than many in the fire and emergency services do today. So I just wanted to kind of explore that with you and maybe share some insights for our audience today that they can take back to their own organizations.
Great, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity of being here with you guys. As you said, we've known each other a long time now, Randy, and it's been great really to have that cross-fertilization of ideas about risk management. And I think the community risk reduction initiatives in the US have really taken the concept onto the next level. So it's great to see.
So do you see sharing back into the UK from the community risk reduction standpoint?
Definitely. I think the starting point for me in Merseyside was really the realization that fire prevention was the core business. And I'd heard that a lot in my career, but I'd not seen the sort of, what does that mean in reality? And I found that lots of firefighters wanted to talk about fire prevention, but when it came to some really tough choices, it was much harder to do fire prevention than it was to talk about fire prevention. And the sort of in Merseyside, we were typically quite an old city. The wealth of the city came about in the 1800s. It was a very, very wealthy port. 50% of the world's trade went through the city, and that was a huge wow. proportion of the world's economy. And so it was a very traditional type of city. But then in the 50s and 60s, when the city hit hard times, a little bit like Detroit, a city founded on the car industry. When the car industry went, deprivation, poverty, and fires. Fires are inextricably linked to poverty and deprivation. And so we sort of tolerated a very high level of fire death and fire injury for many years. And the traditional model was put more firefighting resources, so more firefighters, more fire trucks, trying to get to the problem quicker to solve the fire problem. And what became more obvious to me than the fire problem was the fire prevention problem. What we needed to do was get into the community and persuade them to take ownership of their fire problem. A community cannot transfer its problems to the fire department. The fire department have to help them solve their problems where the problems occur, which is in the home. And so that was the underpinning philosophy that we adopted in Merseyside.
Yeah, and I think that the whole integrated risk management piece that the entirety of Great Britain took on over the last 30 or 40 years, you've seen that slow evolution where there's been a real shift in focus from just responding to actually preventing.
And I think the USA was much further ahead in many ways than the UK when the US really adopted EMS and that medical response as part of the workload of fire departments. And to this day, that's still not really happening in the UK. And I thought that was very visionary in the US. But in a way, the UK focused then on the fire part of our business. And the government sort of took some persuading, but then realized actually the job of the fire service is to reduce the risk, not wait for the system to fail and then respond to sort of mop up the problem. It's to get upstream and prevent the problem. And once the government really made that very clear in law, that it was a legal duty to reduce risk rather than just respond to risk, we had to become smarter, we had to become more scientific, and we had to really think about the business model and the business we were in as an agency. And that's a tough thing to do. And I think one of the advantages the UK had over the US is the legal framework within which we operate is a national framework. Yeah. And so the law was very clear that is the job of the fire service. I think in America, it's been very different. And I think a lot of leaders have shown the courage of their conviction that the fire service is about something more than fire response. And to have the courage of your conviction, you need a conviction. And it's been really, I think, great for me to see over the many years I've been spending time with American colleagues, how American leaders have brought an open mind to this question: what is the job of the fire service? And I think the way in which agencies have embraced community risk reduction, it really is, I think, to the huge credit of the leaders of the American fire services, that it's, they've taken on board the concept and really adapted it for the US. I think there's always a temptation, if something works well in one country, to sort of take it and plant it into another country. And it ignores the basic component of change, which is culture. And although there are similarities, there's huge differences. And so I think it's absolutely right that the concept that we've taken on board in the UK needed contextualization, it needed adaptation for the American culture. And I think American leaders have done a great job of that.
So when you took over in Merseyside and you started to, and I think that was in 96, I believe. Yeah. So, I mean, you were kind of at maybe not at the tail end, but you were at the front end of really redesigning the organizational philosophy and shifting from response only to one of risk reduction. Is that correct?
It is. There were two drivers really. The first was the need to drive down the number of fires, fire deaths, fire injuries. Just the volume of call was huge. And so, we had to sort of tip the balance. We had to drastically reduce that. Alongside that, the costs of the fire service were just escalating to a point they were just unaffordable. The community, quite a poor community, and the way the UK services are funded, there's a lot of local tax funds the local service. And so the community just couldn't afford more and more and more investment in service. We had to cap the cost as well as reduce the risk. And so those two things forced us to look at all parts of the service very, very drastically. Not only do we have to do things better and smarter, they had to be leaner and cheaper. That's a really tough message Oh, it is. It was in 1996, and the 2000s, in a post sort of global financial world, and now, the world's experienced a lot of that sort of lean systems. But in '96, that wasn't the case, and so it was really tough to sort of get that message over to firefighters and get buy-in that this is just what we needed to do for our communities.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that here in the U.S. right now. I mean, the whole issue of sustainability and how we're going to afford our services in the future, because the expenses, just like you experienced, are going up pretty significantly. And I think from a standpoint of, how do we really tackle the issues that we're facing, I think data is telling us that we can't build enough fire stations to get there fast enough to really have the impact that we need to have if we're going to reduce the risk factors in our community. And
no, and I think it's obvious one way, but that doesn't mean it's any easier as a message to get over to people who've grown up in a culture that's really a very community focused in serving the community. It's just the definition of what that service looks like is really changing. It's really changing very quickly. And, we're moving from a landscape that's been pretty stable to all these changes and all these risks. So, suddenly you've got lithium battery systems springing up everywhere. You've got electric vehicles, you've got solar panels, you've got hydrogen cells, these massive community changes and all bringing new risks. And whereas in the past we've had time to really, at a very sort of measured pace, respond, we've not got that luxury. Technology is moving so quickly. Then you put alongside that climate change. I've had some experience. The UK, we don't really have wildfires or bushfires. We have some moorland fires, but the scale, I used to think, living in the UK, well, this is pretty big. Until I went to Australia, and there's a sort of 1,000-mile flame front. It's just the scale is just.
Yeah.
And so when I worked at the Environment Agency, I mobilised to give. We needed to put a disaster waste plan together for a fairly significant bushfire. Well, when I joined the fire service, the idea that you had a plan to deal with all the waste from a disaster would have been bizarre. So when I flew from Sydney to where the fire was, in English terms, it would be like me flying from Liverpool to Moscow. That would be a long flight, and that was just in one state. So that scale is very, very different. So you put the complexity of the problem, bushfires, drought, what do you do with 4,000 dead kangaroos? These questions just, become mind-boggling in scale, right down to how do we prevent the family that lost their home in a bushfire from never losing their home again, So the fire service has got to work on this really granular scale from the micro level to the macro level. And that's really, really challenging when all these issues are just, the pace seems to be accelerating. So I think the leaders of the fire service are doing a really good job of stepping up to the plate. And the more we share learning, I think that the more integrated our learning is as a service, and that therefore our plans are more integrated. But it isn't going to be easy, that's for sure.
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, we've known for at least many years here in the U.S. that our wildland urban interface fires are a direct result of us allowing building into those areas and not managing our forest. And the result has been just catastrophic. And we can't put enough. I mean, some of these fires have 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 firefighters on scene for several weeks. The costs are hundreds of millions of dollars. And and when you make poor decisions going into a process like where you build and then react to it 20 or 30 years later, it's really, really difficult. And I think the mind shift that we need to have in the World Fire Service is, the whole preventive piece is as important as everything else we do.
No, I agree, Randy. I think also we've got to start sending some signals out to the political leadership that things have changed. And I don't think they need to be huge. So I think we need to move to smaller, leaner vehicles. So one of the things I brought in was a very rapid response type philosophy, from guys in the park with backpacks on that could, the pop festival or a concert or an outdoor event. I've backpack responders that can put a fire very quickly, to guys on motorbikes, to smaller vehicles. There's just in the past, we've always measured that initial attack as being when a fire truck arrives with a group of firefighters that are trained to the standards of input just go on and on and on. And, most people have a pretty good idea pretty clearly how to put a fire out. I think there's technical components, but at the heart of it, I think we can engage the community much more in initial attack and initial intervention. And I think we've got to let go a little more from the professional side of the service and engage a very rapid, safe, local intervention. And technology can help us in that. And I think our codes and standards to a degree are going to become barriers. They're assets in the past. I think we've got to be careful they don't become tomorrow's barriers to that pace of change. You look at the speed in which we've got a vaccine. If that was a huge fire, you look at the scale of bushfires. I wonder if the attitude to bushfires was the same as the attitude to COVID-19, whether we'd be having those 6,000 firefighters. I think, and our job as leaders is to start to change the attitude at all levels. And I think there is an attitudinal change to the way technology of climate, the way technology of energy production is changing very, very quickly. And I think we've got to step up and have views about what that means for our firefighters.
Oh, I agree. And I think you hit on a really important point. It's the attitude, it's the cultural attitude of a country, of a city, of a county, and their level of acceptance. And oftentimes we will accept, significant losses. But like you pointed out, with COVID, everybody was scared to death worldwide. So we all, focused our effort.
Well, and I think the fire service is such an amazing brand. I know that I think on previous podcasts you've had another good friend of ours, Ben May, who's so passionate about marketing the fire service, and he talks about the value of the brand, and he is right. Apart from Disney, you'd struggle to think of a brand that's got more acceptability across the board. Got more of a sense of security. And so what we tried to do in Merseyside was use that brand in whatever way we could. So we didn't draw boundaries about, our job is to prevent fires. Our view is our job is to make the community safer and healthier, because the healthier a person is, the less likely they are to die in a fire. If someone can't run away, then they're not going to escape the fire. So the more we invest energy of our downtime in getting communities healthier and fitter, the more likely they are to survive, or not have a fire in the first place, but if they did, survive the fire. So, for example, all of our fire station gyms were open to the public. So our firefighters were champions of wellness. We would use our fire station cooks to sort of bring kids onto the fire station, learn how to cook meals and cook safely. We'd have fire pits in the fire station. So, where you get, areas of deprivation, instead of the gangs lighting cars to attract fire guys to come and put them out, we'd go out there and light a fire and say, look, come round and talk to us. Sit around the fire and talk to us, kids. Don't attack us. And I think that there was I can't think of an idea that we said no to. Firefighters are so innovative. Once you unlock that willingness to adopt and adapt the idea, most firefighters' ideas don't cost a lot of money to implement. They're pretty pragmatic people. And so I've got an idea, the answer is yes. Well, you don't know what it is yet. Well, whatever it is, provided it's going to cost us $1 million, let's just do it. Yeah. All right. Well, what do I need to do? Just do it. What are the permissions you need, and just do it. For example, we had quite a lot of stations where childcare is not a huge problem for a lot of people in many ways, because lots of people want to look after really cute and lovable kids. Elderly relative care that might be incontinent or have dementia or lots of other problems and challenges, it's less appealing to many people. I feel it's much harder. If I were firefighters, it was much harder to get care for elderly relatives than their kids. And so trying to help firefighters blend their lives and their working lives to those care needs was quite a challenge in the shift system. So we created the idea of self-rostering stations and said, look, there's 10 guys on the station. As long as there's 4 guys on the truck, I don't really care how you do it. So why don't you work it between yourselves? Just make sure there's 4 guys on the truck. As long as you're all trained, you're all competent, why do I need a roster? Why do you need a roster? You know? And organize it yourselves and let's see how it works. And you know what? It works. You know, there's some really smart guys out there. Let's trust them. And so those ideas took time in the fire culture to adopt, because we're quite regimented. We quite like that hierarchy. But I don't think that's the world we're into now. And the younger generation of firefighters like that freedom and flexibility we found. It might be different in the US, but that's the world. And I think with COVID, working from home, and I think people's expectations on the work-life balance will change in the future. So I think there's going to be more of that.
Yeah, I think that's pretty significant. Did you put any parameters around, the number of hours they could work, or was there a framework that they had to operate within when they set up their own shift? Or?
Yeah, well, by law, on average in the European Union, you're not allowed to work more than 48 hours a week or over a sort of 16-week period. So we sort of monitored that. And if somebody was working a little too much, we just got the station together and said, well, either they're not looking after themselves or everyone's taking advantage that they're really keen to be at work. You know, either way, let's just have a look at it, guys. But we were really careful not to come down too heavy on that, because you're defeating the object of people looking after themselves. And I always found, for people to be trustworthy, you've got to give them trust. You know, it's another example, Randy. Give them all a credit card. You know, when I said to the finance guy, I want all the firefighters to have a credit card. Well, this poor guy went bald in a second. What are they going to do with it? Well, hopefully spend some money. That's the point of a credit card, isn't it? Well, what audit trail will you have in place? Well, what audit trail do you have? What do you have for your credit card? Well, why don't we use that? What more do you need? Because if you put another audit trail, you're implying I don't trust you.
Yeah.
And yet I trust you with the lives of the community. I'm not going to trust you with a credit card. And I think these messages of trust are really important. On the converse, if somebody breached that trust and stole money or whatever, then they should go to, straight to the police, lock them up. I think behavior is pretty simple. You're either honest or you're not. There's no slightly honest or and honesty. I've never found a dishonest firefighter. I'm sure there's the odd one, but I've never come across one. So what are they going to do with the credit? So I think we've been seduced by systems that are completely unnecessary and over-administrative.
Yeah. Yeah, we had similar discussions when I was in Anaheim with, because, we would send people out on these strike teams that they'd go all over the state and they'd be gone for a long time. And to get them credit cards, even just to take with them on the piece of equipment, was quite a discussion with our finance department.
And it's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, and we got through it, but it's.
Well, one of the things I did was send the finance team as far as I could in the country. So, can you go and attend this conference? And I found a conference in the middle of nowhere that was really difficult to travel to. And I said, but by the way, you can pay all your own expenses, and I'll sign off the form in about 3 months' time, like you make our firefighters wait, and see how you like it. Because it's amazing how quickly the finance team managed to get their expenses. And that idea, we wanted to treat everybody the same. And that's, we had one uniform for the whole fire department. And that was quite a challenge for some of our operational firefighters, and we had a corporate uniform, and anybody wore it. So firefighter, well, that's our uniform. Why? Why is it? What do you mean by your uniform? Is it you want to, diversity is about embracing everybody and their differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think uniform is quite an interesting conversation to have in a traditional hierarchy. But I think these are conversations we've got to have, Randy. Otherwise, I don't think we're really going to embrace diversity when the clothes we wear sort of distinguish our role and our function and who we are. I think that's going to be quite a challenge.
Yeah, especially as we divest our roles and incorporate, the whole community risk reduction, integrated risk management piece. We're going to have multiple players as part of that team, and we don't want them to look different.
No, and I think, climate change. So one of the ideas I tried to get going in Australia was the idea of a climate corps, volunteers who would help on climate events, who may not be interested in being in the firefighting side of the service or fire prevention, but are really interested in the climate change agenda. And can we capture that pool of people?
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people want to volunteer, and the fire service is such a great banner to come together under. Everybody knows where the fire station is, and what a brilliant community hub, and it could serve so much good. And that's why we had the gyms and we had health classes. And what about the climate change? A lot of fire stations in Australia have bottle deposit schemes, so that you can go and drop your bottles off, and recycling facilities at fire stations. So there's some really interesting models around the world about the fire station, the role of the fire station, as well as the role of the firefighter. And I think the more imaginative we are about what community risk reduction means, I think the more the public will embrace and appreciate the fire service.
No, yeah, I totally agree. You had mentioned a few minutes ago about the different response types that you used in Merseyside, and I remember reading an article at one point about the use of motorcycle response to engage with building alarms.
Yeah, so when we did the analysis on our automatic fire alarms, we found that roughly 96% were false alarms. And I guess my view has always been that the purpose of the alarm is for the building owner to protect their building, their asset, and the people in it. So first and foremost, it enabled escape, and secondly, then it protected the asset. And that's all about the building owner. And yet, the building owner wanted me to pay for a lot of firefighters to risk their lives driving under blue lights to get to this building, help the evacuation for the building owner, and then go and check the building owner's building and waste public resource to find out it was a false alarm. And I just felt that was a pretty disrespectful to the community to waste all this community money just so the building owner could be sat in the building saying, well, you pay for it all. That's not our responsibility. That's the owner of the building's job. So you do all that. And then if there's a fire, you phone us. That's when we come, when you've got a fire. But until you've got a fire, it's your building and your systems and your problem. You sort the problem out. And so the midpoint, the compromise, that I'll send a guy who can help you understand and analyze and sort of check the building, but you only need one guy to do that. You don't need 4 or 5 people. So I'll send them on a motorbike so they can get there pretty quick, even when it's busy traffic, and they can help you do your, assessment of the problem. And so that's the sort of model we brought in. And in all honesty, most people agreed with it and adopted it. It does have an impact on turnouts. You dramatically reduce the number of times your fire trucks go out, roughly by about 30%. Most fire departments, 30% of the calls are to false alarm fire alarms. And I always felt it was very demoralizing and very dangerous to send fire trucks to something you knew on 96% of occasions was going to be a false alarm. And the other thing today, with social media and Facebook and phones, you can't blink without somebody taking a picture. There's nothing could happen without there being a million pictures on Facebook within seconds. So
Yeah.
the idea that you could somehow miss a call, I just think it's a bit bizarre. Particularly when weighed against the risk of how many firefighters get injured responding to automatic fire alarms. We had a couple of firefighters killed, and I just thought, I'm never again going to somebody's home and saying your husband or your wife lost their life, knowing that they were going to something that was just completely unnecessary. What an appalling job. And I just know that's not what we should be doing.
No.
And so those policies have been in place for many years. The cities are all still stood there. And what else could you do with that time? And just the impact on the environment, just the fuel used alone. This is millions of dollars responding to automatic fire alarms. And, there's a great question. What if we didn't? What's the worst that could happen? And it is a big cultural shift. And in that pool of calls that, yes, there might be the odd call you miss, but there is anyway. You miss it for other reasons. I think that's the job of a leader, to make reasonable decisions and balanced judgments, not to always run for the hills and say, well, I'm not. It's what we've always done, so I'm not going to change it because I've got to carry the risk of what if. And I think the job of the leader is to carry that risk and to make those. That's why leaders get paid more.
I agree with that.
Yeah, with responsibility and accountability, that's what goes hand in hand with being a leader.
Yeah, no, that's really true. But but you always butt up against that, cultural edict that this is the way we've always done it, and it's really, really difficult to change. And even though we know 96, 98% of the time when an alarm goes off, it's a malfunction.
You're right, but I also think we're staffed with so many nice people. I think the fire service finds it really hard to disagree amicably. Just because I might disagree with some doesn't mean I don't think they're a nice person and we can't be friends. It seems to me friendship and comradeship have room for, you don't have to agree on everything to have friendships and comradeships at work. You can have great working relationships and have different views. At the top of an organization in our hierarchies, someone's going to make the call. And I think providing the person who makes a call is very open and transparent and authentic about why they've come to a decision, I always find firefighters, even if they disagree, went with it. They understood it, and actually found it much cleaner to work in that space, because at least they understand, I made the decision for these reasons. And you may disagree with X, Y, and Z, and you're entitled to, but I've made the call, and this is what we're doing. I think most people would rather that than knowing in their hearts this doesn't feel right. The moment a firefighter loses their life going to a false fire alarm, we've all got to look at ourselves and take a long, hard look and say, is this really the right thing to do for our service and for our community? Or we kill a child, en route to a fire alarm. You think, look at the mayhem caused just by the transport movement. Is it really, is it worth it? And that's our judgment to make. But I don't think we should be walking away from some of those tough judgments. And that was always my view, Randy. And so I felt a motorbike, sending someone to help businesses was a reasonable compromise. And so we tried to approach decision making in a very transparent way, very authentic way. We would consult, but again, consultation, we were very clear what that means in a hierarchy. It means I ask your opinion about something, and then I listen to your opinion. It doesn't mean I will always follow it. I think there was a culture, perhaps before I was a leader, was consultation means you do what, if enough of us just say you do this, you have to do it because you're consulting. And that's not true. I'm consulting to find your view. If a lot of you share a view, for example, there was a very common view, it wasn't the job of a firefighter, to go and fit smoke alarms in people's homes.
Mhm.
That was virtually a unanimous view, apart from me. Luckily,
Yeah.
luckily, I was the guy who had the job of deciding what we did. And so my decision, even though everybody disagreed, was that's what we're going to do. And that's what I mean by having the courage of your conviction. And to be fair to our firefighters, even though a lot of them disagreed, they went with the decision because they understood that I was passionate and authentic and said, okay, now we've had our say, we will go with it. And then very quickly, they sort of outperformed me in their convictions. They just did an amazing job. And you can see it all over America with community risk reduction. It's not all chief driven, it's firefighters taking the initiative and firefighters coming with ideas. And I think that's the magic of community risk reduction, that firefighters can really show their initiative and innovation.
No, I totally agree. And we're bumping up on time for our podcast. So what I'd like to do is roll out of this one. And can you come back for a second podcast? We'll finish up. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of that cultural element of, that shift that you experienced and we've experienced in the fire and emergency services. Then I'd like to kind of explore with you where you see the future going.
Great. No problem at all, Randy. Thank you for the time. It's been great speaking to you.
Yes, good speaking with you. We'll be back. We'll be back on part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.